Hi everybody, good morning. It's Wednesday morning, time for your morning devotional. We're considering the Lord's Prayer and more specifically the statement, lead us not into temptation but deliver us from evil. The first time we spoke about it, we spoke about the word temptation. That temptation is something that God cannot do. Scripture is clear about that. But what God can do and does is puts us through trials. Trials lead us to a point of there being a test, and if we fail the test, then basically we lead ourselves into the position of temptation. We've been looking at it from the point of view of what Jesus said to the disciples in the garden. He said, watch and pray. Prayer is great, but in order to pray we need to be watching for the tactics of the devil, keeping ourselves aware of his tactics, and we spoke about that yesterday. But today I'd like to suggest to you that this cry, lead us not into temptation, is actually the cry of fear. It's a cry of the fear of a person who fears losing the joy of their salvation. You see, once we find something, once we get something and we hold on to it, our greatest fear is losing that which we have found. And when we find the joy of our salvation, the greatest fear is that we will fall back into temptation and lose the sense of joy that we now have found. And I think in a very real sense, that's what's being prayed. We look at Peter after his denial and meeting Jesus at the seashore and Jesus restoring him. I bet you Peter went through life saying, man, I never want to go through that again. I never ever want to fall into that temptation of denying Jesus ever again. I fear that I will do that. And he would have prayed, Lord, lead me not into that temptation where I'll disappoint you again and lose my joy. It's the cry of the prodigal when he met with his father and he cried. He said, Father, just make me a slave. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And when he was made, that beautiful sonship relationship was back and restored again, and everything was back to where it was before. I bet you in the back of his mind, he's saying, man, I never want to go astray again. I never want to lose the joy of my salvation and the joy of my redeemed relationship with my Father. Lead me not into that temptation again. It's also, I guess, in nature, it would be true of a butterfly. Beautiful butterfly spreading its wings and spending time cruising the skies. And I bet the butterfly looks back and says, man, I never want to be a worm. I never want to go back into that cocoon. Lead me not into the temptation that I would ever want to go backward in life. You see, once we have experienced the joy of sins forgiven, once we've experienced the joy of a restored relationship with God, I don't think there's anyone amongst us that would ever want to go back. And we live in the fear of losing that joy. Sadly, that's not always the case. And even in the Bible, we have the children of Israel being redeemed from Egypt, from bondage and slavery in Egypt. And they're now on their way to the promised land. And sadly, we read that most of them kept looking over their shoulders, looking back to Egypt and saying, man, we wish we could go back there. There was bread and there was meat back in Egypt. And we don't want to go where we're going. We just want to go back. That's like the butterfly saying, I want to go back into the cocoon and become a worm again. And so the natural cry, the spontaneous cry of someone who has genuinely found Christ is, Father, lead me not into temptation. I just don't want to go back there again. I never want to lose the joy of my salvation. If you've been redeemed and you have experienced the wonder of that joy of salvation, of sins forgiven, I'm sure you'll identify with this cry today. Lead me not into temptation, deliver me from evil. I just never want to go back there again. I hope that's your situation today. Go and have a great day. Bye.